This episode goes out to our patron, Val Ritz. You are a constant source of joy in the Discord server. Hi there, Garrett Robinson here. Welcome to the 28th episode of the Nightblade Epic Podcast Season 3. So, hey listener, I dropped a little warning at the end of last week's episode, but in case you missed it, today's episode is going to be a little rough. But you'll be okay. I'll still be here, and we'll get through it together. No announcements today, let's just get into today's episode. Today, you're getting chapters 37 and 38 of Darkfire. When we left off, Lauren and her friends had rescued Jem and Jordell from the Shade Fortress, only to find Commander Triskin blocking the bridge that led to their escape. Enjoy. Darkfire, Chapter 37. The commander stood uncaring in the middle of the bridge, his warhammer standing on its head beside him, the handle leaning against his thigh. But he did not wear the sleeveless shirt and vest they had seen him in before. Now he wore a suit of full plate, gleaming dark gray metal that covered his arms and legs and breast. Upon his head was a helmet with two small black horns jutting forth from the forehead. Lauren remembered how he had slammed his face into Jordell's and was nearly sick at the thought of those horns punching through flesh and bone. Even his hands and feet were shod in metal, with interlocking plates that looked thick as a finger. Lauren wondered how he could even move in such armor. Triskin's smile widened as they watched him. "Why do you wish to leave my company so early? Have I proved such a terrible host? I know that Jordell, at least, enjoyed his stay with me. Why, you cried my praises all through the night." Jordell glared from a face that was a mass of bruises. But before he could speak, Zane spurred forwards, and when he reached the bridge, he dismounted. "You might think to frighten the others, but not me," said the wizard, his voice rumbling with hidden power. "I was bound and helpless when last I saw you. I am not so now. Do you wish to test yourself against my strength?" "I hear the mage stones that lie behind your words, wizard," said Triskin. "I am not impressed. Scuttle back to your master before I teach you the meaning of courtesy." Zane's eyes glowed, and he formed balls of flame in each fist. "I have been freed by one who holds life sacred," he said. "At her wish, I will give you one chance, since you have not yet raised a hand against us. Turn and fly. Vanish into the mountains, and never show your face in the Nine Lands again. Fail to obey me, and I will end your tale here." "I raised my hand against the mystic and the boy, while you hid somewhere in these mountains," said Triskin. "They still bear the marks, but of course you were not there to see it. Here, I shall show you." He seized the handle of his warhammer and swung it in a wide arc. It slammed into his left hand with a loud clang of metal. Then he took one step forwards. Only one, his plate boots grinding on the stone. Jordell and Alburn nudged their horses, but Zane turned to them and raised a hand. "Stay back, for my fires may fly wild, and I would spare you from their heat." They halted. Alburn wore a look of relief, but Jordell's frown only deepened. Zane put forth his power, and the sky darkened above them all. The clouds swirled down into a great spiral, channeling towards Triskin where he stood on the bridge. Then a great lightning bolt arced forth. Its thunder was deafening, leaving a ringing noise at the edge of hearing. The ground where Triskin stood erupted in a burst of light, throwing up a plume of stone dust. But through the dust, Triskin stepped forwards again, rolling his shoulders as though an ache in his neck pained him. Zane paused. Lauren saw it and could almost feel his hesitation. But then he loosed his power again, this time with flame. It rolled towards Triskin in a great wave. But when it reached the commander, it rippled and roiled, splitting before him as though upon an invisible wedge, and past him without harm. The man did not even seem to sweat inside his armor. "Stop toying with him, Zane!" cried Annis. Terrible knowledge dawned upon Lauren. "Zane is not sparing him," she murmured. "He is—" Her words cut off as a deep and terrible laugh issued forth from Triskin's helmet. "What is wrong, little fire mage?" he said. "Come, throw more sparks my way. I shall use them to roast you all on a great spit." He was getting closer now, and Lauren wanted to cry out for Zane to flee. But the wizard held his ground. He let loose with a gale to blast Triskin back, but the winds guttered and died almost before they had fled his fingertips. In desperation, he shot white-hot flames at the stones of the bridge. Rock and mortar melted, turning it from a solid roadway into a pit of red liquid. But as Triskin continued his relentless advance, the stone cooled beneath his feet. Each place he stepped turned solid again, giving him a narrow walkway across the guttering flames. Cursing, Zane finally stepped back, but even in his retreat he struck again. Dark fire sprouted from his fingers, twisting with a fury blacker than a night without moons. In grasping tendrils it stretched forth, like the fingers of the dead, twisting around Triskin and wreathing him in ebony flames. And then Lauren saw, or thought she saw, a dark glow, not from Zane's eyes, but from Triskin. Its dark light emanated from the commander's head, or somewhere about his neck, and its malevolence matched the cold fury in Zane's glare. It lasted only a moment, and then it vanished. But the dark fire fell back as though a wind had blown it away, and vanished to nothing on the air. Jordell and Albern leaped forwards, but too late. Triskin reached Zane and struck, swinging his warhammer around for the wizard's chest. Zane twisted, but not quite far enough. He took the force of the blow on his shoulder instead of his chest. It spun him around and tossed him to the ground. He cried out with pain. Then Jordell was there. His sword struck twice on Triskin's armor before the larger man backed away. With more space between the combatants, Albern let loose 2 shafts. Both found joints in Triskin's armor, in the shoulder and the groin, and pierced the chainmail there. But now that she was looking for it, Lauren saw the glow of dark light again. Just a flash of it, and this time she was sure it was the neck. Triskin stumbled, but then he ripped the arrows free and attacked Jordell with a vengeance. Albern ceased his volley to stoop and grip Zane's boot, pulling the wizard across the stones and out of the fight. Lauren leaped from her horse and seized her bow, running to stand beside the bowyer. Behind her she saw Jem struggle to climb down from his saddle, but Annis seized his bruised arm in her hands and squeezed. "Do not be an idiot, Jem. You will only get yourself killed." Lauren drew an arrow as Albern had taught her, the motion coming easier now. But she did not have his aim, and she knew it. Jordell and Triskin were locked in a frantic dance, and she could not find a clear shot. Albern planted one more arrow in Triskin's knee. A second ricocheted from his helmet, and then Jordell was in the way again. Triskin swung in wide, swooping arcs. He moved much faster than his armor should have allowed. Lauren could hardly follow the motion of the weapon. But Jordell was faster still with his sword, and he was a seasoned fighter besides, never reaching too far nor withdrawing too quickly. The brute swung too wide at last, leaving an opening. A dagger appeared in Jordell's hand. It punched through the chainmail at the side of the breastplate, and Triskin grunted. Lauren leaned forwards, mouth open, hoping he would fall. But it was a ruse. Triskin grinned with bloody teeth and seized Jordell's tunic. He gripped his hammer just below the handle and slammed the head into Jordell's chest. The mystic nearly fell, choking. Somehow he managed to bring his sword around and hack at Triskin's neck, but the swing was weak and the mail held. Triskin's metal knee found its place in Jordel's stomach, and the mystic dropped. The hammer came up to finish him, but Lauren and Albern shouted and charged. Albern reached for his sword, but without a weapon of her own, Lauren wasted no time. She seized Triskin's neck, trying to bowl him over backwards. He lost his balance and stumbled, but somehow managed to catch his feet. Leaning back as he was, his gut was an easy target, and Albern drove his sword up and under the breastplate, deep into the giant's belly. The helmet came off under Lauren's arm. Triskin's hair swung wildly, streaked with the blood coughed up from his lungs. Lauren glimpsed a tattoo worked into his neck, a twisting, intricate design of black that looked very like the designs on her dagger. It flashed with dark light for a moment, and she recognized the glow she had seen before. Then Triskin reached back and seized her by the hair. He flung her bodily over his shoulder to crash into the side of the bridge. Only its low wall kept her from sliding off into the chasm and falling to the valley floor impossibly far below. He ignored the sword in his stomach and grabbed Albern. The horned helmet was gone, but his head was plenty hard enough. He smashed it into Albern's nose with a crack, and the bowyer's head snapped back with a fountain of blood. Jordel lay only a few paces from Lauren. His eyes were glazed and wild, searching around for something. He was nearly senseless, but still he fought for his feet. His breath came in wheezing gasps, and Lauren heard a gurgle in it. Though his chainmail was whole, there was a dent in his chest that should not have been there. "Jordel," she said. "Jordel, look at me." The mystic's eyes tried to focus on her face. Their keen blue seemed clouded, as if by some spell, but at last she saw him recognize her. Lauren scrambled to hands and knees and went to him. "The back of his neck, a tattoo like the signs upon my dagger. It glows whenever we strike him. It is what keeps him alive." Jordel's head swung around, far slower than it should have. Albern had broken the giant's grasp and was fending him off with a sword, but Triskin was pushing him ever farther towards the edge. "A tattoo," mumbled Jordel. He coughed, and a bloody lump spattered upon the stones. "Dark magic. I was right." He fought to his feet, using his sword like a crutch. Lauren stood and helped him. At first he could gain no more than one knee, but in another moment he got his feet under him. "I must help Albern." Lauren let go of Jordel to run at Triskin, but Jordel seized her sleeve and pulled her back. He dragged her around to look into his eyes. "Hear me, Lauren. The Shade's Dark Master has returned, and Triskin is one of his favored champions. Ask Zane of it. I told him everything." Lauren looked over the mystic's shoulder at Zane. He stirred while Annis and Jem knelt by his head, trying to rouse him. "No magic," said Jordel. "It is no proof against them. I never told him that. Tell him." Then he broke away from Lauren's grip and charged at Triskin's back. Lauren reached for him, tried to grasp his arm. She missed her grip. The chains of his shirt slid away under her skin. In his hand he still held his sword, but he cast the blade aside and reached for a hunting knife in his boot. Stooping for it almost made him fall, but he kept going. Triskin's metal fist struck Albern in the jaw, knocking him to the ground. Then Jordel hit Triskin from behind, wrapping his arms around the commander in death's embrace. His knife plunged into the back of Triskin's neck, and together they pitched over the edge of the bridge and into the chasm below. Darkfire, Chapter 38. They found the bodies shattered on the floor of the valley. Albern thought it was too dangerous to take the long road down, but Lauren would not hear it. She would not leave Jordel's body to rot where the crows and the wolves and the harpies could peck at it. So they went through the stronghold to the long stone road on the other side that descended to the valley floor. Then they traversed all the way around the foot of the mountain. The land beneath the bridge was mostly soft loam, punctuated by rocks that jutted from the soil like rotten teeth. A fine mist clung to the ground, swirling around their boots and cloaks as they picked their way along, searching. Jordell lay on his back. Mercifully, his eyes were closed. Lauren did not think she could have borne to see them open, their keen blue robbed of life. Those eyes had mesmerized her the very first time she had seen them, and had given even the mightiest warriors pause. That they would no longer be beside her, to watch over her and all the 9 kingdoms, seemed a crime beyond punishment, or any hope of justice. Triskin's body lay not far away. Jordell's knife was buried to the hilt in the tattoo on his neck. The commander had struck one of the rocks when he landed, and it had shattered his back so that his body was almost in 2. His neck was twisted, and every part of his armor was dented and tarnished. Not a muscle of his body stirred. They dug a grave for Jordell. They had no shovels, and so had to make do with their fingers and sharp stones. It took an eternity, and they could not make it deep enough, so when they had laid him in it, they covered him with stones. Before, though, Lauren wrapped him in his red cloak, fetched from the saddlebags of his charger. His clasp she kept, stowing it in one of the pockets of her cloak. If she could no longer walk by his side, she would keep that to remember him by. And some urge of her heart told her to bring it to his brothers in the mystics. Disgraced though he might be, still she guessed that there were some of his brothers and sisters who would want to see him honored for the services he had rendered to the 9 lands, for she would have hazarded a guess that he had performed many. They stood beside the stones a while. Lauren's eyes leaked steady tears, slowly, for she tried to still them. Annis did not weep, but that might have been because she was trying to comfort Jem. The boy was inconsolable. He buried his face in his cloak and threw himself down upon the stones, refusing to leave them. Albern had to carry him away from the grave, but he did it gently, with soft murmurs as though to a wounded animal. Zane stood there with Lauren the longest. His eyes were wet with tears, but he did not let them fall. Albern had helped him bind his arm in a bandage, holding it against his chest, for his shoulder would be long in healing. His other arm fidgeted with the hem of his coat, as though itching to take some action, if only he could determine what it was. "I was not strong enough to save him," said Zane. "No one would have been," said Lauren. "He said Triskin's mark made him proof against all magic. No wizard could have stood against him, no matter their power. Mighty they have called me all my life. I wish I were mightier still." Lauren said nothing, for those words sounded dangerous. "Did he say nothing else?" said Zane, looking up at her. "Their dark master has returned," Lauren thought. "Ask Zane." "Nothing that needs saying now," she murmured. "We shall talk upon the road." They finally left the grave near midday. As they walked from the hollow where he lay, Lauren turned back one final time. The sun had come out at last. She thought shafts of light should have come piercing down through the overcast, to light upon Jordell's grave, but it was not one of Bracken's stories. Still, the day was warmer and gentler than any they had seen in weeks, gentler than it had any right to be, for one of the great men of the 9 lands lay dead. Triskin's body they left for the Harpies. The road back up was harder, for every step away from the valley felt like they were leaving him behind. Lauren knew they were not really, but it was hard to still the pain in her heart, and more than once Jem asked if he could go back one last time. Annis shushed him each time, and by the time they reached the stronghold, he had fallen silent. They returned to the bridge. Its stones were stained by blood, Lauren's and Albern's and Jordell's and even Triskin's. Her eyes shied away from it. She could look only at the spot on the edge where Jordell and Triskin had gone over for the last time. Zane stopped his horse and dismounted, and then went to the edge of the bridge. Lauren climbed off Midnight and stood beside him. They looked down over the edge. The valley was too far below for them to see the grave, but Lauren could imagine it. It would be just there, she decided. There, in between those rocks. Zane reached out his hand, and his eyes glowed, still black, for the mage stone still ran in his veins. Fire spilled forth from one finger, small but white-hot. It ran over the stones of the bridge like a pen, painting words there in liquid rock. When he had finished, he sent forth a gust of air to cool it. "I never learned to read," said Lauren quietly. "What does it say?" Zane looked at her in surprise, but only for a moment before he turned back to what he had written and intoned, "Here fell a great man, a clarion trumpet against danger, in darkness where none could see. His name was Jordell." "It is beautiful," said Lauren. "I am no poet." "It fits him. He was never one to bandy words. And in those few lines are hidden a great many secrets, which was very like him. You speak the truth there." "And what will you do now, Zane?" said Lauren, turning to look at him. "Your powers are at their peak. Even with one of your hands injured, we could not stop you if you wished to leave, not even if we were at our full strength, and we are battered and broken." Zane looked sharply at her. "You still have the rest of those mage stones?" Lauren swallowed, but she nodded. He knew she did. "Give them to me." She did not move. "You know I could take them if I wanted to," said Zane. "I do not want to. I want you to put them in my hand." He held forth his good hand, palm outstretched. Lauren marveled again at how smooth his skin was. He looked as though he had never worked a day in his life, and now that she knew from whence he came, she supposed he never really had. Lauren reached into her cloak and withdrew the mage stones. She had barely tied the packet together, and it sat lumpy in his fist. With one sweep of his hands, like the casting of a spell, Zane hurled the mage stones into the void. They spun as they fell, flashing in the sun's renewed light, and vanished into the chasm where Jordell would lie forever. Silently, Zane mounted and rode on. Lauren watched him for a moment. Then a hand stole beneath her cloak. She fingered the inside pocket, the one on the other side that hung just by her right hand. She brushed against the fine brown cloth of the second packet of mage stones. It was cool and rough against her skin. Lauren gained Midnight Saddle and followed Zane. This has been a production of Legacy Books, written and narrated by Garrett Robinson. The music in this podcast was created by Will Musser. Check out his incredible work at willmusser.com. That's WILLMUSSER.com. Today's letter is L, and that is the last letter that will let you unscramble this season's secret message. Thank you for listening, and I'm sorry. Bye-bye.